Welcome to another Tippling Philosopher video. I am going to talk to you today about nothing unusual. This is classic problem of evil stuff, but I'm just going to relate it to my own personal life. So I was recently diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, primary progressive multiple sclerosis, which is kind of like the worst type of MS you can get. So it's a sort of degenerative autoimmune disease where my body attacks itself. And I would become gradually more and more debilitated and disabled. I have recently had stem cell treatment to treat this, so hopefully, I don't know whether that has worked yet, but that will take 6 months or so to find out whether that has been effective as a treatment. So fingers crossed with that one. But the considerations as far as philosophy goes for something like this, it's your bog standard problem of evil, and that is, if God is all powerful, all-knowing and all-loving, he would be able to do something about any unnecessary suffering, would be knowledgeable enough to do something about it, and would be loving and caring enough to want to do something about it. So therefore, what explains so much suffering in the world? And you can apply this to, from a stubbed toe in the morning to genocide. Is that spectrum to, from a tsunami that kills 240,000 people, to mass murders and malaria and forest fires. So the scope of this, it's the same argument with any kind of supposedly unnecessary piece of suffering. So the question becomes for the theist, of course, if you don't believe in God, then it's kind of, so what? It happens, right? It's just the uncaring nature of the universe, and obviously that's what I would adhere to. But if I were to be a theist, if I were to believe in God, then obviously, and I believed in the classical theistic God, the kind of God who is all loving, all knowing and all powerful, then I would need to explain each and every instance of suffering, specifically if it is deemed unnecessary, because if it's unnecessary or gratuitous, then this kind of invalidates that version of God. So therefore, every piece of suffering must be necessary, which means if you look at something like myself having an autoimmune disease and eventually, becoming so disabled that I can't move and whatnot, then this in some way must be necessary. Okay, if you were to believe in God. So you've got these options. 1, God does not exist. 2, God exists, but he's the philosopher's God, the God of the deist. Doesn't get involved in any kind of goings on in the world, right, in earthly or universal dimensions. So that I have multiple sclerosis and people die of cancer or malaria or wars or whatever is kind of irrelevant to him, or he's not interested in acting. But then it's hard to see how such a God could have any kind of personal characteristics, and indeed how he could be all-loving, for example, and have a deistic quality where he just flicks that first domino and leaves the universe to get on with it. This is not the God of classical theism. So that's the second option. The third option is that God exists, but it appears that he doesn't like me very much. This might be because I'm a bad person. Maybe I don't believe in him, and that's annoyed him. And or whatever the reason is, I kind of either deserve this or I warrant it in some way that because I'm a bad person, or I've got it coming to me, or whatever. And a fourth option is very similar to that last one, but that he knowingly planned me to develop MS for some reason. So it's not omission, which is where you don't do something For example, if I see someone being beaten up on the streets and I decide not to intervene, I'm omitting to do something. So it's a case of not doing something. So in the case of me getting MS, God has decided, you know, maybe not to have done something. So he didn't necessarily plan me to develop MS, but once it happened, you know, he allowed that to happen. Whereas this fourth option is he actually designed it to happen knowingly, and in this way, it's more of an explicitly willed outcome or action. So it's kind of, take that, Pierce. You know, I'm going to design the universe and I'm going to design you into it, and you are going to invariably develop this incapacitating condition. And that is a case, I suppose, either is 3 or 4 is a case of me being used instrumentally. You know, there is some reason for me to develop this and for God not to do something about it, not to stop it happening. So it's very consequentialist in its ethical outlook. You know, the ends justify the means. And that can cause a lot of problems for Christian or theistic morality, because at the end of the day, consequentialism doesn't need God for its sort of moral values, and that's why theists don't really like consequentialism, because actually they can't use it to argue to or from God. So as I mentioned, the way this can look with those last 2 options is that A, I deserved it, and therefore it's some kind of retribution or punishment. B, I deserved it in as much as the conditions serve to bring about a greater good. So this is that consequentialist ideal. Something about me getting MS means that the universe is or will be a better place. So it's this greater good that comes about as a result of me being used, or, you know, it's God using me to bring about this greater good. That my suffering isn't just gratuitous. It's not for, you know, it's not for no reason. There is a reason for my suffering, and it is to bring about some greater good. Or I didn't necessarily, so the C here would be as an option, I didn't necessarily deserve it per se, but the existence of MS in the world. So it's not me that's being used, but it's MS being used instrumentally as a tool. So that being designed into the world offers a benefit for, or in some capacity for, who knows whom. So there's a greater good that comes about as a result of having MS in the universe, as opposed to not having it. And I'm just one of the unlucky ones who happens to have developed the condition. You know, it's nothing personal. It's not against me. It's just that I am part of this whole idea that MS will bring about a greater good over whatever time period that may be. And so there you have it. So either I'm explicitly being used, or MS is being used, or God is deciding not to do anything about it, but of course he's still the designer of the universe and all of this. Or God's just flicked that original domino and just sitting back and watching this all happen, you know, all the suffering that takes place. Or of course God doesn't exist, and I would definitely go for the latter option there. And this problem partly comes about because of this idea of divine foreknowledge, which is a real issue for people, for theists, right? So if God knows every future counterfactual, so if God knows every event that will come to pass, then every event that does come to pass needs to be explained in terms of all of God's attributes, of being all loving particularly. So that God knows that these things happen and continue to happen, these take some real explaining. So there you go. That's where I think the problem of evil argument is in terms of my condition. That's as far as I'm concerned, life sucks at times for a lot of people, and life's great at times for a lot of people, and it's a bit of a luck of the draw, genetically and environmentally, and that seems to be borne out by all sorts of evidence. But if you do believe in this all-loving version of God, then everything needs explaining, and quite frankly, me or you stubbing a toe in the morning, it needs equally as explaining as multiple sclerosis or a tsunami. There is, although there's a spectrum of suffering as far as we would understand it, as far as how we might feel about stubbing our toe compared to a degenerative disease, compared to mass death or pain and suffering. Actually, each of those are in a sense equal insofar as any unit of unnecessary pain needs to be explained in terms of an omni-God. There you go. Any questions in the comments below? Any comments in the comments below? And please subscribe to my channel. As ever, question everything, apart from what I say. Yeah, don't question that.